Hi everyone, this is Mr. Castro speaking, and I'm recording this video for the English 11 students at San Ysidro High. So prior to this lesson in your English 11 classes, you have been focusing on the skill of paraphrasing, specifically being able to paraphrase the main ideas of a text. So to build on that skill, we are going to start learning how to explain not only what an author is saying, but also what an author is doing. In order for us to explain what an author is doing, we're going to learn today about something called rhetorical strategies. Rhetorical strategies are tools that help writers craft language so as to have an effect on readers. Strategies are means of persuasion, a way of using language to get readers' attention and agreement, which simply means that rhetorical strategies are a way for an author or speaker to get the attention and the agreement of their audience, or in other words, to persuade their audience. So the following is a list of commonly used strategies. The first one is showing how things are different. Next is showing how things are the same. Analyzing or examining an idea, making an idea clear. Providing evidence. So if an author is providing evidence, you'll notice things like factual examples, statistics, etc. Next, we have describing. And if an author is describing, you'll notice narrative details. It's going to read like a story almost. So you'll see details of people, places, things. It's almost like the author is like recounting an event or telling a story. And lastly, we have attacking an idea. So on the next slide, we have a chart of doing verbs. Going across the top of the chart, we see the list of strategies that we just learned about. Below each strategy, you see a list of something called doing verbs. And for each verb, we also have it translated here on this chart in Spanish. So if Spanish is your primary language, then if the English verb is something you find confusing, you can always look at that Spanish translation to help you out. But we'll come back to this chart later. So for now, let's look at these 3 steps. These are 3 simple steps to be able to explain what an author is saying and doing. The first thing we want to do after we read the text is to determine which strategy the author is using. And we can do that by looking at that chart on slide number 2. And after we have determined which strategy the author is using, then below that strategy in that list of doing verbs, you want to pick one of the doing verbs that makes sense to explain what the author is doing. And keep in mind that an author could be using more than one strategy at the same time. If you notice the author using more than one rhetorical strategy at the same time, that's okay. That just means you'll have more doing verbs to select from. The next step after you have selected your doing verb is to use this sentence frame that we see here, author plus doing verb plus topic, to come up with something called your doing sentence. And then after you have written your doing sentence, then the very last step is to explain what the author is saying by paraphrasing the main idea of the section in your own words. And I know that paraphrasing is something that can be challenging, but when you come up with a doing sentence first, it actually makes the saying sentence a little bit easier. So once you have the doing statement, all you have to do is paraphrase the main idea by elaborating on the topic from your doing sentence. So if this looks really confusing, I mean, that's okay. We're learning something new, but we'll go through a few sections together as an example. So on this next slide, we have some background about the speaker and the speech. So before we continue with this lesson, go ahead and pause this video and read this information. Okay, so now that we have read that background information, let's go ahead and watch this speech. This was presented at World Refugee Day 2009 by Angelina Jolie, and the link for the speech is in the description below this video. Okay, so now that we have watched the speech, Let's go ahead and take a look at this first section from the speech. We're not going to paraphrase the entire speech, but we'll look at some sections from it. So in this first section, we want to read it, do our best to understand it, and then follow these 3 steps in order. So in this part of the speech, Angelina Jolie says, "We are here today to talk about millions of desperate families, families so cut off from civilization that they don't even know that a day like this exists on their behalf. Millions. And numbers can illuminate, but they can also obscure. So I am here today to say that refugees are not numbers. They are not even just refugees. They are mothers and daughters and fathers and sons. They are farmers, teachers, doctors, engineers. They are individuals all. And most of all, they are survivors, each one with a remarkable story that tells of resilience in the face of great loss. They are the most impressive people I have ever met, and they are also some of the world's most vulnerable. Stripped of home and country, refugees are buffeted from every ill wind that blows across this planet." So now that we've read this section, notice how um, she repeats the word refugees several times. She repeats the word families several times. In the middle of the section, she says that refugees are mothers and daughters and fathers and sons, farmers, teachers, doctors, engineers, individual, survivors. So she's basically describing what the refugees are like. She's giving us different examples of people who could be refugees. So for step number 1, we want to figure out a doing verb for this section. So let's go back to slide number 2. And in slide number 2, we see the strategies listed across the top of the chart. And let's try to figure out which strategy she's using. And as I mentioned earlier, it's possible for an author to be using more than one strategy at the same time. So she's not really showing how things are different. She's not really contrasting refugees with other people. She's not really showing how things are the same. She's not really making a comparison. She's making an idea clear, right? She's making this idea very clear to us of um, who refugees could be or who they could include. She's not really describing, because if she were describing, this would read more like a story with narrative details. She's not really attacking an idea. So making an idea clear would really be the most logical strategy to select. And below that strategy, we see all these different doing verbs: clarifies, defines, details, extends, establishes. So there could be more than one doing verb that makes sense for a doing statement, but we need to pick one that definitely makes sense. So clarifies might be a good doing verb to select. Defines, I would say that she's defining who the refugees are, that they're people of different families and different jobs. She's kind of detailing the refugees. So I'm going to go ahead and pick the word defines. So going back to this slide, let's go ahead and go into edit mode. And before we type up our doing statement, let's go ahead and write this down to make the doing sentence a little bit easier to understand. So our doing statement, if you look at step 2, it includes an author, a doing verb, which we've already selected, and it includes a topic. So the topic is going to be a short phrase on what the section is about. We need to start by following that sentence frame for step 2. The author's name is Angelina Jolie, but I'll go ahead and type her last name and I'll remove the highlighting. So Jolie, for the doing verb, I picked defines. And what is she defining? Well, she's really defining who refugees are. So Jolie defines who refugees are. So now we have our doing statement. Next, we need our saying sentence. So if you look at step 3, we want to elaborate on the topic by paraphrasing the main idea in our own words. So the topic is who refugees are. So we need to elaborate by explaining who the refugees are. but using our own words. So if you look at step 3, it says we need to paraphrase the main idea. So this is going to be more detailed than the topic. It's not going to be just a short phrase. It's going to be a complete sentence. And to come up with that complete sentence, we are going to elaborate on the topic. So if you look back at the section, refugees are members of different families. So instead of putting mothers and daughters and fathers and sons, in our own words, we can say that they are members of families. Instead of putting farmers, teachers, doctors, engineers, in our own words, we can explain that they are people holding different jobs or occupations. So refugees include members of different or members of families and people representing various occupations. So now if you look at the doing statement on the left and the saying statement on the right, you'll notice that there's a connection. The saying sentence is longer than the doing sentence. The saying sentence is more detailed. And the saying sentence is in our own words, elaborating on the topic from the doing statement. So before you guys go ahead and finish up this assignment on your own, let's start the next section together. So if we look at this section, let's go ahead and read it, and we'll follow the same process. So in this part, Angelina Jolie says, I remember meeting a pregnant Afghani woman in a completely abandoned camp in Pakistan. She couldn't travel when everyone else was relocated because she was too late in her pregnancy. She was alone with her 2 children and an older woman. There was nothing for miles around the camp, not a single tree, no other people in sight. So when they asked me to come in for tea, I said I didn't feel it was necessary. But being Afghans, they take pride in how they treat their guests. So they insisted and they guided me into a small dirt house with no roof to keep out the scorching heat, and they dusted off the 2 old mats that they ate, slept, and prayed on. And we sat and we talked, and they were just the loveliest women. And then with a few twigs and a single tin cup of water, they made the last of their tea, and they insisted that we enjoy it. So if we take a look at the section, you'll probably notice that it's very easy to visualize, meaning like imagine in our minds, like what's happening in this part of the speech. She's basically telling a story. She's recounting what happened when she met these Afghani refugees. So going back to slide 2, we want to select a strategy in order to help us select a doing verb. So she's not showing how things are the same. She's not showing how things are different. She's not attacking an idea. Something she's doing is she's clearly describing what's happening. So as I mentioned earlier, if an author is describing, that means the author is using narrative details. The author is basically telling a story, which is what Angelina Jolie was doing in that section. So looking at the verbs under the describing column, we see characterizes, exaggerates. She's not really exaggerating anything. So be very careful about selecting your verb. You could be looking at the right strategy, but you also want to select the right verb. Angelina Jolie is illustrating an idea. Illustrate means like you explain, like you paint a picture in the minds of your audience. She's recounting. Recount means like you remember what happened. So she's remembering what happened when she met these refugees. So recounts would be a really good verb to select. Illustrates would also be a really good verb to select. Characterizes could work depending on how you write the phrase or the topic. So basically all of these verbs in the describing column would work except for exaggerates. I'm going to go ahead and go with the verb recounts. So let's go back to slide 7. Once again, we want to follow that sentence frame from step 2. So I'm going to start by putting the author's last name. The doing verb that I'm selecting is recounts. And what is she recounting? What is she remembering? We just need a short phrase about this section. So in a short phrase, I'm going to put meeting Afghani refugees. It's not super detailed. We want all the details on the right side. In this section, she is recounting meeting Afghani refugees. Now, for the very last step, we want to elaborate on this topic, meeting Afghani refugees. So we want to explain what that experience was like for her using our own words and a complete sentence. So we can start by putting Jolie met some refugees in Pakistan, and I'll have you guys go ahead and finish. So to complete this section, go ahead and read this section again, and then just go and complete the sentence, giving me more details of what happened when she met these refugees. But make sure you're using as much of your own words as possible. After you have completed this section, you have 2 more sections to complete. So to complete each of these last 2 sections, just go ahead and follow these 3 steps in order that we just practiced together. So you want to read the section, go back to slide 2, select the strategy at the top of the chart that makes sense for what the author's doing. Below that strategy, select the doing verb that makes sense for like how the author is presenting the information. And then from step 2, you want to insert that doing verb that you have selected into that doing statement. Make sure that for the topic, it's a short phrase about the section. And lastly, for step 3, you want to elaborate on the topic by paraphrasing the main idea of the section in your own words on the right side. So hopefully this video was helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me or your English teacher. Thank you for watching and have a great day.